Hi, everybody. So yeah, I'll switch gears a bit here, and I'll kind of try to introduce a bit the criminal perspective to data and the pandemic. I'll share my screen right away, and what we're actually doing, at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which is right now the largest investigative reporting organization focused on organized crime and corruption in the world, is we are studying and we are exposing how criminals, take advantage of the pandemic. Criminals historically thrive whenever there's a crisis, when you have, times that are hard on people. This is the time when they make the big bucks. This is when they make money. So they did not stop with this pandemic at all. We've looked, recently at, cocaine trafficking, which is thriving, despite the fact that, the world shipping is kind of blocked, in many ways and such. So criminals are very, very active right now, and they do have an advantage over the general population. And that is that they built their digital presence, in a very thorough way a long time ago. They had to hide a lot, in the past 20 years. They had to find ways, to kind of avoid the legal systems while at the same time using, whatever was handed to them. I'll give you one example. So we're looking right now, both at the macro level and micro level, at this public procurement around COVID, around the pandemic. And, when you look at charts and data, and you see, for instance, that a quarter of people put on ventilators, died somewhere in maybe New York or such. To us, that type of data, especially when it comes from crime-ridden countries, tell a bit of a different story. Give us a bit of a different context. Take, for example, Russia. In Russia, hospitals in many regions have been forced, to buy ventilators that were of very, very bad quality. Ventilators that would kill, people. So when you look at the statistical data, how many people died on ventilators, you got to keep these type of factors into account. The fact that, the criminals might be in it, and they might be making a lot of money from it, while people obviously are their victims and they die. We've seen this, in the past 2-3 months over and over again. We've seen bids, put out by governments in less transparent ways than before the pandemic, and that's a huge issue. We've seen, masks that were bought from organized crime, and they were very, very bad quality, and all sorts of gear, that doctors needed in hospitals, and patients needed, and they were of very, first of all, of very dubious provenance, because they were sold, and brought in countries by organized crime, and then they were, really, really, really bad for the health of people. So this is, on top of what data is generated, by governments. And honestly, if you think, if you think about crime and corruption, you see a trail, a pattern, where criminals, kind of took over a lot of these data generating structures. And I'll give you some examples. Let me go onto this very short presentation here that I titled "Crime Data and the Pandemic." And what we're seeing, for the past 15, 20 years is more drive from the side of the criminals to collect data. You always hear about compromise, right? In the context of elections, in various types of contexts where decisions are made. Well, compromise, is actually information that's compromising to someone, and that's gathered usually by criminals. Some of these criminals are politicians, some are criminal entrepreneurs, global entrepreneurs, developing their crime empires and all that. So compromise is a big component of the data set that's kept and generated, by criminals. Part of this huge data set is not public data, but it's data that is available sometimes to investigative reporters, and I'll tell about how to deal with it a bit later. So you have compromat, then you have the black ledgers. This would be data that is kept by the criminals sometimes on their own activities and sometimes on other organized crime groups' activities. And unfortunately, you have in many instances you have this type of root level access that the criminals have to your data. This is something that we pointed to, a long time ago. We started about 10 years ago looking at media ownership, and criminals, especially, starting in Eastern Europe, but also in Latin America and even, the US and other parts of the world, they started inserting themselves into the ownership of media, So they started, owning media outlets of all types, and through this, they tried to reach their goals. But besides media ownership, again, a point that's critical, to how the criminals deal with data and how we should be, dealing with criminal data is that criminals for a long time have root access to data. And I'm talking here especially about ISPs. I'm talking about, internet service providers that are owned directly by criminals. This can be server farms somewhere, for instance, in, I don't know, Serbia, in the Balkans. Now, if you look at many of these places, that are owned directly by criminals, what you see is an array, a variety of websites from all over the world. Some websites, host websites of, hospitals, airports, all sorts of infrastructure. A lot of it is actually hosted on servers owned by criminals. There's discussion forums, there's porn sites, there's all sorts of information that flows through these servers, and they flow directly to the criminals. So the criminals in the past 10 years, 15 years, amassed a lot of power, because obviously information is power. And this power that they're using in this pandemic as well. And actually their power is quite growing. But let's look a bit at this model, which is very, it's very much simplified. What you have is, the criminals diversifying business and integrating businesses. So on the server farms that they own, they conduct, mining of various types of cryptocurrencies. They host websites, they push malware through these, through these servers that they own. And they also do this, all this other side, of the data collection, where they have, the compromat data, access to your personal data, a lot of business intelligence, because unfortunately, not many businesses conduct their own due diligence when they set up their web infrastructure. So I think, this is something that we need to keep in mind, because this is a bit of a different universe from, the data universe that is generated by governments. Now, the point is, criminals are very sophisticated, and one of the questions is how to investigate them. How to actually go beyond this data that is collected and generated by these criminals. So what we do at OCCRP is we actually look a bit, if you want, in a holistic way to this, right? We're taking organized crime groups and we're deconstructing them. We're trying to explain, and to learn how they work and what kind of methods they use and how do they use your personal data? How do they use the data that's generated by their sensors? They generate data in various ways. So one of the things we do, and I'll give the example of a project that we've done last year, which is called the Troika Laundromat. This is a project that won, a Sigma Award for data journalism this year, And in this project, what we've done is we've looked at the money of the organized crime. This is very, very important because it's the money where all these criminal interests intersect. Be it public procurement in the pandemic times, be it money laundering that goes from from a criminal group in Mexico that's killing people and trafficking drugs, to another group in Africa, for instance, that's involved in people smuggling and such. So trying to find this intersection between between data sets is where they're vulnerable. And this is what we've done with this project with the Troika Laundromat. We've used a lot of the data, generated previously by leaks, such as the Panama Papers leak, and Paradise Papers and others, leaks that where the investigative reporting was led by ICIJ. But at OCCRP, we have our own leaks. So when combined, when combined these leaks, when this data is combined, it's at the intersection of these that you can find the crime. It's at the intersection of these where you can actually spot and identify and expose the crime. I'll give you one example, what we've done with the Troika Laundromat. This was massive, it was a lot of data that had to do, with illegal money transfers in the tune of more than 26 billion euros, what you can see right now on your screen. Now, these are very complex transfers between offshore type of companies and, money that go from this bank to that bank, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And, it's just overwhelming in many ways. But really, in order to find out, what's systemic behind this, what the organized crime did, what we've done was to analyze each of these banking records, to go transaction by transaction, and to spot the anomalies, to spot the places that are kind of interesting in the data. And usually people focus on the big numbers. They focus on, hey, yeah, this transfer is of $100 million. This is where we need to go. But looking for patterns and understanding how criminals work, you understand that they always make some mistakes, some errors that are sometimes tiny. So what we're doing, what we did in this case was we looked for some of the smallest transactions that were in the hundreds of dollars, and they made a huge error with their money transfers. They were actually creating companies and paying for the creation of those companies from the same bank accounts that they used to do these huge money transfers. So suddenly you could see that the universe, all this universe of lots of companies belonged, to a single place, to a single group. In this case, it was a bank from Russia. And these were payments that were in the hundreds of dollars, So trying to understand, and seeing this gave us an entry point into the criminal world. And once you get there, you're in a wealth of data. Again, data that's mostly not generated by governments, not public data. This is, data that's generated by commercial entities, sometimes banks, sometimes data that's generated by the criminals themselves and such, and of course, leaks. So once you understand, once you pierce that world, you're forever in, and that's very, very, very important, because you can always expand from there. And this is what we're doing at OCCRP. Our reporting is not one-off. We don't just cover one topic and then grow and then go and then leave it and jump to another topic and so on and so on. No, we build up. Once we get the data set, we index it, and each time we can actually match that particular data set against other data sets. We're doing that. So, for instance, what we're using quite heavily at OCCRP is a system that's called Aleph. This is where we're indexing a lot of this criminal data, plus the public procurement data. And lately we've indexed quite a few data sets from many countries, that are very relevant to this pandemic. I think it will be relevant now. It is relevant now, and it will be relevant to the post-pandemic reconstruction period, because you wanna know where the money goes, and you want to know who steals the money in many cases, and you want to know who's giving you, the bad kind of materials to use in hospitals and all that. But this type of data is only really valuable when combined with other data sets that are out there. So let's take, for instance, the example of public procurement databases. Of course, I mean, because of the lack of transparency lately with some of the governments that invoke all these emergency kind of powers and all that to not award contracts in a transparent way, there's less access to that procurement data. But even with with this scarcity, if you match procurement data with import-export data that's, you know, some of it is indexed by Contrade, by the UN, right? Or by, you know, commercial databases such as ImportGenius or Panjiva and others, you know. And if you go country level and you match, you know, these large data sets, you know, procurement data sets, gathered from lots of countries, plus the import-export data generated by the UN or by these commercial enterprises, and then country level, wherever this data is publicly available, that's a lot of power, and only that will give the exact image of what kind of trade was done on the back of the pandemic. And I think that's what people need to know, and that's, you know, what people have to know, because they have to know why in Ecuador they've received this kind of, you know, really bad gear, you know, and why, you know, their numbers are so high when it comes to people dying and so on. So I think this is something that's the responsibility of data journalists, you know, that are really focused, you know, not only, you know, on crime and corruption, but the intersection of, you know, criminal generated data sets and government generated data sets, you know. So what we do have here, you know, with OCCRP, and we're putting this at the disposal of, you know, the journalists and activists of the world, is our data systems where we indexed, you know, a lot of this data that I'm talking about. And also, you know, our journalism in itself that provides context, because it's all about, you know, identifying patterns and context in the end, you know. And I'll wrap up with this. Thank you very much.